January 7, 1978, 21-year-old Arizona State University student Deana Bowdoin's body was found by her boyfriend, strangled and assaulted. Deana Bowdoin was an honor student at Arizona State University and a member of the International Business Honor Society Beta Gamma Sigma. She was considering a career in law, international marketing, or diplomacy. Whether the person was elderly or whether they were little kids, she just seemed to be able to talk to them and relate to them. Such a kind young woman's life was tragically taken from her on the night of January 7, 1978. It was a day like any other. Bowdoin had a nice dinner with her parents and left to meet a friend at a bar nearby called Monastery Bar. Her parents wanted her to spend the night at home, but because she had a part-time job in the law firm in the morning, she decided she would go to her apartment instead. At 12:30 a.m., her friends watched Bowdoin drive away, not knowing this would be the last time anyone would see her alive. Bowdoin's boyfriend and brother went to see her at the temp apartment but saw that she wasn't there, so they left. When the boyfriend returned around 2 a.m., he saw her car parked outside the apartment, so assuming she was home but just sleeping, went inside her apartment only to see her in bed with a belt around her neck and 3 stab wounds on her chest. He attempted CPR, but sadly it was far too late. Police investigators found semen on her underwear, but they couldn't match the DNA to anyone. The case unfortunately sat unsolved for 2 decades without any new leads. 23 years later, cold case detective Tom Magazzini would try to match the DNA sample found to see if the perpetrator had been logged into the registry, and, to his surprise, would discover that the perpetrator had indeed been logged. The despicable person who committed the heinous crime all those years ago was Clarence Wayne Dixon, a man who was already serving 7 consecutive life sentences in prison for another assault he had committed in 1986. Apparently, Dixon was also a student of ASU and lived across the street from Bowdoin at the time of her murder. In 1977, Dixon was arrested for assault with a deadly weapon when he hit a 15-year-old girl over the head with a metal pipe, but psychiatrists who examined him concluded that he was not competent to stand trial as he was suffering from schizophrenia. Maricopa County Superior Court Judge Sandra Day O'Connor found him not guilty by reason of insanity, but as he was so mentally ill and dangerous to the community, he would be civilly committed to the Arizona State Hospital. But sadly, the attorney's office and courts did not begin the commitment proceedings immediately, and Dixon was let go. Only 2 days later, he would take the life of Deana Bowdoin. Dixon was arrested for burglary and assault with a knife after attacking a woman in her apartment. And in 1985, he threatened a 20-year-old North Arizona University student with a knife while she was jogging on Lone Tree Road. He dragged the victim into a secluded clearing in the forest while saying to her, "I'm gonna take you up there, you, and leave you there." After tying her hands behind her with a rope, Dixon undressed his victim and removed her running shoes. He then forced her to engage in numerous sexual acts, all the while wielding a knife in one hand and threatening her. Afterwards, Dixon became remorseful and requested that the victim cut him, offering her the knife. The victim, however, refused. Dixon, relenting on his earlier threat to leave the victim naked, returned her clothes and shoes, but promised that he would be out of town before she could report him to the police. The victim reported the horrible crime to the police immediately after returning to her dorm, and the police successfully found and arrested him when he was trying to hitchhike to Albuquerque. 30 years after Bowdoin's murder, on November 13, 2007, Dixon stood trial for the sexual assault and murder of Deana Bowdoin. Unfortunately, the sexual assault charge was dropped due to a statute of limitations, but he was found guilty of first-degree murder and was sentenced to death. It only took the jury 20 minutes to find him guilty. His execution had to be delayed due to the botched execution of Joseph Wood via lethal injection. Wood's execution took 15 doses of lethal injection and an hour to finish, which was only supposed to take 1 dose to be sufficient. Dixon's execution was rescheduled to October 19, 2021, but was delayed yet again because the new lethal injection drugs they acquired would expire only after 45 days. Finally, his execution was rescheduled for the last time to 11th of May 2022. After Dixon declined to choose between lethal injection or the gas chamber, the default option of lethal injection was chosen for him. He chose to have a KFC meal, a strawberry ice cream, and a glass of water as his last meal. His execution would only take 11 minutes, and Dixon became the first person to be executed in the state of Arizona since 2014. Dixon would proclaim his innocence until his dying breath. While the medical staff was trying to administer the drugs, Dixon said, "You are being as thorough as possible as you try to kill me. How twisted is this? You worship death, don't you? Make sure you miss the first time right, to teach me a lesson." November 9th, 1971. 2 women and 3 children were horrifically murdered in their own home. The murderer, John Emil List. The father, the husband, the son. In 1951, John had married Helen Morris Taylor, who had a daughter named Brenda. After this, John List worked for an accounting firm in Detroit, then as an audit supervisor at a paper company in Kalamazoo. There, he had 3 children with Helen. As the years went by, Helen became an alcoholic and was becoming increasingly unstable and volatile. Also, his stepdaughter Brenda married and moved out. Following this, the List family moved twice. First to Rochester, New York, in order for John to get a job at Xerox, and then to Westfield, New Jersey, where the horrifying and tragic murder would take place. In 1971, John lost his job at the bank and was too embarrassed to tell the family and neighbors that he did not have an income anymore. So, like any sane person would do, he started pretending he still had a job by going to the train station and spending the whole day there, reading newspapers and taking naps. He paid the bills by stealing from his mother's bank account without her knowing. He wants to solve this issue once and for all, and he saw only one option: to murder his entire family and disappear. 9th of November 1971. After seeing his kids go to school, John List shot his wife Helen in the back of the head while she drank her morning coffee. Then he went upstairs to her mother, Alma, kissed her, and shot her as well. When his 16-year-old daughter Patricia and 13-year-old son Frederick arrived home from school, he shot them in the back of the head one by one. After this, the despicable murderer made himself a sandwich for lunch and left to cheer for his 15-year-old son, John, at his high school football game. They went home together, and he shot his son multiple times as John attempted to defend himself from his father. A month passed by, and the neighbors suspected something was wrong with the List family as they saw no activities in the house, but the lights were constantly on. When the police entered the house for the first time, they would discover the work of a truly evil man. 5 bodies were laid out on top of sleeping bags in the ballroom. A 5-page note from John List to his pastor was found. The note explained he feared that his family would turn their backs on God as the all-world's evil would become too great to bear. So in order to ensure their entry to heaven, he killed them as a mercy. John List was apparently not merciful to himself to suffer the consequences. He had meticulously prepared for the murders. He went to the bank and emptied out his mother's account, cancelled all their family's deliveries, cleaned the crime scene, cut himself out of every photo in the house, contacted their family, friends, and the school, notifying them that they would be going on a vacation to North Carolina for a few weeks to visit his in-laws. He apparently spent the night in the mansion where his dead family members lay and left the next morning, leaving only his car at the Kennedy International Airport in New York as a final clue. John List would evade the law successfully for 18 years. The year is 1989. New Jersey prosecutors contacted an expert forensic artist, Frank Bender, to create a physical bust of what John List might look like 18 years later. Psychologists speculated that he would be still wearing the same glasses to remind him of his successful and young life. The bust was almost perfect and was featured on America's Most Wanted on May 21st, 1989. And 22 million people saw his aged-up depiction. Many tips were coming in, and one tip in particular stood out. It came from a woman in Richmond, Virginia, who thought her neighbor looked almost identical to the bust. The neighbor was a man named Robert Clark, who was an accountant. The authorities went to Clark's house immediately and spoke to his wife. Her story made everything crystal clear. Robert Clark was John List. He was arrested on June 1st, 1989 and confessed to his true identity on February 6, 1990. During his trial on April 12, 1990, he denied the responsibility for the murders by saying, "I feel that because of my mental state at the time, I was unaccountable for what happened. I ask all affected by this for their forgiveness, understanding, and prayer." The judge, however, was not swayed by his words. He said, "John Emil List is without remorse and without honor. After 18 years, 5 months, 22 days, it is now time for the voices of Helen, Alma, Patricia, Frederick, and John F. List to rise from the grave." John List was sentenced to 5 terms of consecutive life imprisonments. In 2002, when interviewed, John List expressed some remorse, saying, "I wish I had never done what I did. I regret my action and prayed for forgiveness ever since." Also, when he was asked why he did not unalive himself, his answer was that he believed he would not be allowed to get into heaven if he did that. John List died at the age of 82 from pneumonia while imprisoned.